one. Welcome to week 3 of the WPIAL Blitz show. I'm Badge, that's Ian. And Ian, why don't you introduce our very special guest this week?
Yeah, so this week we're happy to have Seneca Valley offensive coordinator Ryan Lehmeir with us. Seneca Valley just beat Pine Richland 24-20 this past week on a essentially last-second touchdown pass. There was 9 seconds left in the game. So, Coach, tell us a little bit about the game and what were your emotions going into it, being as you had formerly coached some of the kids that were on the Pine Richland team. I'm sure that was hard seeing them lining up across from your guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's just definitely had. There was a lot of relationships with a lot of players on both sides, obviously. And, it has its moments. I think it was weird, kind of at warm-ups and whatnot. But, once the ball kicked off, I think, the competitors and everybody, it kind of came out and that kind of went away. And, but, I think, yeah, there was some emotions, definitely. Not just myself, but Tim and John, the guys that, that were with me at Pine Richland as well. I mean, I'd be lying to you say it wasn't hard at times, but it was a great win, and I think it was a great step in the right direction for our program, and that's what it's about. I mean, I'm really, really proud of the kids and how they responded and just the way they reacted to everything. There was a lot of ebbs and flows in that game, and towards the ends there was a lot of emotions on each side, with just what happened and how everyone scored. So. Just to be able to keep their composure and to be able to, really be buttoned up and doing the things that we needed to do to, complete the drive that we needed to do to win the game.
Yeah, obviously, you might have got a little late start on the season, getting over to Seneca Valley and what have you. Is this pretty much talk about your offensive philosophy that you're moving forward with at Seneca Valley?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty similar to what I've been doing in the past. I think there's a lot of similar formations and stuff. I'm sure that there's some things that are the same, but again, we want to take advantage of the things we do really well, right, and kind of adapt the system to the players. And I don't think it's so much about the new scheme or, the new hot wave of plays as much as it's, fitting the guys that you have on your team into doing something that they can do well and you guys can have success. I don't think every year, you don't get the same team. And I think that's what's cool about high school too, because the crop of players changes every year. So, sometimes you're big and not as fast, and sometimes you're small and really fast. And, you have to adapt to that. So, we're going to continue to just kind of, run our system, but, tailor it to the players we have at Seneca Valley.
Speaking of the players that you have, I saw a great interview after the game with your quarterback, Graham Hancock, who, incredibly well-spoken kid. I was really impressed that he had the composure to, string those answers together right after the game, after a big emotional win. But he credited you with the play call that won the game on the 24-yard touchdown pass. Was it something you saw in their defense that you knew that would be open, or just trusting your players and kind of down distance and time necessitated a throw like that?
Well, I think, there's a lot of things that go into that, and I think, right off the bat, you think the 2-minute drill, but then it's, not just what we're doing, but what are they doing? 9 seconds left in the game, arguably probably the best player on the field, Jeremiah Hazley, goes and plays the center field safety. So that kind of makes things difficult. So, we wanted to go for the end zone, and we had enough time to score. So I don't think the mindset was to kick a field goal. I think, we wanted to go for the end zone, and, Graham really held himself together. I mean, he made a couple big time throws, taking some shots. And I think he really matured as a quarterback, on Friday. And, that's a great win for him as far as, and just for the team, but from confidence for a young player in his third start ever, to be able to do what he did. And, with the situation being what it was, I think he handled himself great.
You talked a little bit about, formation, defensive formation, dictating, what what you did there at the end. Talk a little bit about, your philosophy on how, you kind of use formations to dictate the kind of defense that you want to go up against.
Well, in that situation in the game, you really don't have much, I wouldn't say you don't have many options, but the fact of the matter is you don't have a ton of time to put plays together to get there. You know what I mean? You have to get it done, ASAP fast. So I think right there from a play calling perspective, you can only call so many things that'll get you in the end zone. And then it's, I think, where our matchups at, where our guys are at, and Brandon Ross and some of those guys and Luke Lawson. I mean, they made plays down the stretch in that drive, and it was all of them. It took every one of them. So I really think it was just more, where we were at on the field and, who had the hot hand. I thought Brandon Ross had some big catches. He had a huge catch on that drive and got out of bounds and stopped the clock probably 3 or 4 plays before that. So, we were just kind of feeling it and, get in the huddle and kind of talk to the guys, and you could see who's confident, and, the lights get a little bright for some others and some want it and some don't. And I think we called on the right guy. So.
Most definitely did. And even afterwards, you could tell the chemistry that those two guys had in that interview, that, they talked about how they've been running that route for, 3, 4, 5 years now between the two of them. And that, Graham knew when he threw it that Bren was going to come down with it. So it was just great job all around by you guys. And I mean, and Graham said it in his interview too, just a great team win. Like I was really impressed by how well he talked up, for being the guy that threw the game winning touchdown pass. Afterwards, it was all, this is a great team win. And, this is really just a, marking point of everything we've built on, and just got to stack wins now moving forward. So on that note, what are your goals for the rest of the season?
Well, the goal is to win every game. I mean, that's what we're going to do every week. I think the mentality of the program and Coach Bushley, the culture there is strong, and they take it. They have a 1-0 mentality. We do every week, and that's how he goes about his business, and that message resonates with the rest of the coaches and the team. And I think, I don't think we're looking ahead. We get a young group that's growing by the practice. They're getting better every day. So, we just got to keep stacking days, and then offensively, we got to keep stacking plays and put drives together. And I think a lot of our not shortcomings, but things on offense where we have, not done what we needed to do is because of ourselves. And I tell the kids every week, I said, if we don't got to beat Seneca Valley, we're gonna be in good shape. So I think, we just got to clean up some of that stuff and, continue to kind of worry about our own house per se, and worry about ourselves and just week by week, day by day, just keep getting better. And, every Friday is another opportunity to, go out there and get one in a good column. So.
You were part of a, coaching staff that was together for, quite a period of time. Have you guys stayed in contact after you've kind of moved on?
Yeah, I talked to those guys a good bit. We're good friends. I mean, you spend so much time with those people for that many years. Our wives know each other and kids. And I think that's kind of, that's always going to be cool. And I don't think, that anybody can ever take away what we did there. But, this is a new stage and a new phase of my life and, career coaching. And I couldn't be more excited about being in Seneca Valley and getting to coach with the guys I do now and get to network with a whole new group of people and learn from those people as well. So, I think I'm always going to remember it and cherish those friendships with those people. And, those still talk to them to this day. But, moving forward, I'm at Seneca Valley, and I'm gonna really embrace that.
Well, good.
Well, thanks a lot for taking the time to join us. And you've got a North Hills team coming up this week that's off to a 2-0 start and has a really exciting player now. Robert
doesn't
Dickinson.
get any easier.
Yeah,
yeah, you ain't kidding. It's gonna be cool because I actually played there. So going back to Martirelli Stadium, I was telling the kids it's one of the few stadiums in in Western PA. There's no track around it. Mm-hmm. So now that there's no COVID restrictions, when that place is packed, it gets pretty loud. So I think it's going to be a really cool environment just to see it, to stand on the other sideline. You know what I mean? You know where everything is, but you're probably not welcome a lot of places now, but it's, I think that's going to be kind of cool. And then, I think it's a good opportunity for the kids. Just like you said, they're 2-0. They had 2 big wins. So, we got our work cut out for us, and we're gonna give it another shot on Friday.
Yeah, it is a really cool place. My daughter just moved out there, actually very near, North Hills there, and I got to go by the stadium and that. It is ultra cool, and I can't wait for the time that I get to go out. And Ian, I'm gonna have to get out there and start covering some of these games.
You
That's
should.
just all there is to it here. All there is to it. But
It's a pretty
anyway.
cool place.
Well, listen, Ryan, thank you very much for taking some time here. We really appreciate it. Monday night always seems to be a good night for coaches. They're, still kind of not really totally, invested in the upcoming week. And, like I said, Ian and I really appreciate you being on the program.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate it. And, I look forward to talking to you guys again.
Great.
All right. Take
Thanks
care,
so much.
Coach. See you
Best
later.
of luck
See
the
you
rest of the season.
All right.
Thank
Bye.
you so much. Bye-bye.
Wow. I mean, I had to ask the question, related to the coaching staff or whatever like that. That coaching staff had been together
For a
through
long
thick
time.
and thin.
Yeah.
I think it was like 9 years, complete staff, 2 state championships. I think it was a great answer, but and I understand that life goes on, but as he talked about the relationships that were forged there, not only on a professional level, but on a personal level, with families traveling to these games all over the place. It doesn't just affect, teams and players. I mean, the communities and all the families and everything like that, it does that too. But boy, great guy. And man,
Yep.
he's really got that Seneca Valley group going, doesn't he?
He does. And the other thing too that I thought was really interesting, and anytime coaches move on, and it's fairly common, that assistant coaches sometimes move on to bigger gigs, other places too. And I think he's a guy that, he was an offensive coordinator at a 5A school that won a couple state championships. Now he's up to an offensive coordinator at a 6A school, and we'll see what they can do. But, he's obviously assimilated some of those life lessons. If you remember back last year when we interviewed Eric Kasparowicz, when he was the Pine Richland head coach, he said pretty much the exact same thing that Ryan said tonight about tailoring the offense to the players. It was like the exact same quote. It was like, sometimes we have guys who are big and sometimes we have guys who are small and fast, and we got to just tailor. Like, it was the exact same quote from those guys. So I thought that was really cool, kind of hearing the same thing from somebody who had learned under, Eric Kasparowicz, basically kind of reiterating that and taking that philosophy to Seneca Valley as well.
Not that my opinion matters, but I think that any coach, any head coach or coaching staff in high school football, if you don't tailor your offensive and defensive philosophy around the players that, you've got, I mean, you're just not going to be successful anyway. So, but anyway, all right, here we go, Ian. I mean, the graphics just keep getting better and better. Take control, my man. I lost your sound, Ian.
Oh, sorry about that.
There we go.
All right. Yeah. Do
we have no program
to...
if you're not on it, let me tell you.
We have a program, just wouldn't be as entertaining. All right, so we're back, the WPIAL Blitz show on here. See how to contact us, get a hold of us on Twitter and other places. Thanks to our sponsors, Get Recruited and Brute Athletic, and we'll talk some more about them during the rest of the show. So some key results from week 1. We talked about Seneca Valley topping Pine Richland on that last second touchdown pass. And it was a heck of a play. I mean, he threw it as a perfect route right down the seam. And they talked about Jeremiah Hazley moving back to safety, who's a Duke recruit at linebacker. And, even after the game, the quarterback and receiver talked about how, the safety either turned the other way or slipped a little bit. And so they had the opening to make the pass connect into the back of the end zone. So all in all, just a great win for Seneca Valley, and Pine Richland falls to 2-0. So we'll talk some more about that a little bit later.
0-2, you mean?
0-2. Yeah, sorry. I'm just so used to saying it. Yeah. So yeah, Pine Richland falls to 0-2. Game of the week was Thomas Jefferson beating Gateway. We talked a lot about this one coming in last week, that TJ's the 2-time defending state champions in 4A, number 1 ranked 4A school. Gateway was the top ranked WPIAL school in 5A. So anytime, 2 top ranked programs from different classifications get together, it's very noteworthy. They played a tough, hard fought battle, and TJ came out on top. So just a really good game that was really fun to have happen.
Let me ask you a question related to this game. Do you think that it's
Yes.
more a testament to Thomas Jefferson, or more of a, eye opener that maybe Gateway might not be as good as we thought?
I mean, I would say both. This was Thomas Jefferson's first game of the season too, and they graduated a lot of players from that state championship team. So it was a good proving ground for them to see how well their new players could step into the starting lineup. Connor Murga, their leading rusher, returned, but other than that, they pretty much had to break in new quarterback, new receivers, had some returning starters on the line too, which makes a big difference.
Yeah.
But Gateway's still a very good team. I mean, I wouldn't sell Gateway short here. They beat a good Delaware
Well,
Valley team
it
in
doesn't
week 1
matter
or
in
week 0.
it doesn't matter in the whole scheme of things in
Right.
the WPIAL rankings or whatever.
You're right, it doesn't. But the cool thing is that these games now were ones that were pre-scheduled by the WPIAL. So it was cool that they kind of gave us some of these premier matchups that we got in week 1. Pine Richland, Seneca Valley, Thomas Jefferson, Gateway, the Steel Valley, Clairton, which was, Steel Valley was for the first couple years of the 6 classification era one of the best 2A schools around. They won 2 WPIAL championships, won a state championship, made it to a 3rd WPIAL championship game that they lost to Washington. So they've fallen off a little bit the last couple of years, but they're kind of expected to have a bit of a bounce back this year. And Clairton's been one of the best 1A programs really for the last 2 decades. So just getting those two together, was noteworthy. But once again, that was the first game of the season for both of them. So it was a little sloppy on both parts. But that one, I'm not ready to read too much into that, but I think Clairton was pretty heavily favored just because of their recent success. Some noteworthy results from this week. Bell Vernon and Chartiers Valley, they met in the quarterfinals last year in the playoffs, and Bell Vernon won handily. Bell Vernon pretty much did the same again this time. That Char Valley just couldn't stop their ground game. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And Keystone Oaks and South Park was another rematch of playoff teams from last year. Central Catholic and Penn Hills was a matchup of the premier 6A school in Central Catholic versus a sort of middle of the road 5A team. I mean, Penn Hills has been really good in the past. They won the 5A state title a few years ago, but last year they started a freshman at quarterback and running back. So it was kind of, seeing how those kids continue to develop, but they still have a little bit of a ways to go. But I still think they can be competitive in 5A this year. They should be a solid playoff team. But they, they're not quite up to Central Catholic standards, but really not many teams are at this point in time. That was a good bounce back win for Central Catholic after a hard fought loss to Imhotep Charter in week 0. And then an interesting one, Central Valley beating Blackhawk. So both of these teams actually had their opponents cancel on them. Blackhawk was supposed to play Hopewell and Central Valley was supposed to play Beaver, and both opponents canceled, and so they just rescheduled a game against each other fairly late in the week, but they were actually also supposed to play each other in a couple weeks. So we'll see if they wind up trying to find new opponents for themselves in week 3 whenever they were supposed to play each other, now that they have already played, or if they're just going to get out there and rematch again. But a good matchup between Blackhawks, a very solid 4A program, and Central Valley is the top 3A program. So once again, a very fun game over in Beaver County between 2 Beaver County teams. Keystone Oaks and South Park, we talked about another rematch of a quarterfinal from last year. Although interestingly enough, last year's quarterfinal, I think Keystone Oaks won 24-20 or 28-24. It was a 4-point win. And it was 34 or 35-0 this time around. So KO's taking a step forward. South Park may have taken a little step back, but I fully expect both of those teams to be in the playoffs as well. So they may meet again. You never know. And then the other noteworthy one was Lehmeir Valley, who's a 2A school, beat Elizabeth Forward, who was one of the favorites in 3A. So that was we figured Lehmeir Valley was going to be good, but I didn't know if they were going to be this good. So that was a pretty noteworthy result for me.
I think so too. For me, it's nice to see because, obviously Lehmeir Valley had so much success before they joined the WPIAL or the WPIAL. Personally, I'm rooting for them. I'd like to see them, get back to that success and, on the big WPIAL stage. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think they should be competitive in 2A this year. They've got a really good Sarah Catholic team in their conference, so the conference title may come down to a game between those two, but we'll see as we go through the season. We mentioned last week too that there were some rivalry games in week 1, actually quite a few. So some noteworthy results. Mount Lebanon beat Upper St. Clair in a rivalry of neighboring communities in the South Hills. I actually took my family to that game. It was pretty close in the first half. Of Mount Lebanon they were up 20-6 at halftime, and then Upper St. Clair returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown to make it 20-13, and then Lebo drove down the field and scored and pretty much pulled away after that. So Mount Lebanon's defense still has not given up a touchdown this season. Their only touchdown allowed was on special teams. So they're definitely a team to keep an eye on there in 6A that we talked about at the beginning of the season. Couple other ones. Highlands beat Valley in the Battle of the Bridge. So Highlands gets their name on the bridge for the foreseeable future. Aliquippa beat Beaver Falls. Freeport beat Knock for the Pike Trophy, which they just started this year. So it's actually a fish with a football in its mouth, if you can see the trophy that the Freeport kids are holding there, which is kind of cool. Then some other games between some neighboring communities as well, with some noteworthy results. Peters Township and Cannon Mac had some of the best Twitter trash talk between student sections going in, and Peters Township went out and backed it up on the field.
And look, these are all great games. It's just, it really, for me, it's uncomfortable that these games don't mean anything in the grand scheme of the WPIAL. In all of these other districts, they go against the power rankings, and they don't here. I mean, it's just like an exhibition. It's like they're playing an exhibition season. Now, it does matter in the state rankings, I guess, which is, literally just a beauty contest anyway, but it's just hard. It's just hard for me to get my arms around the fact that these games in the scheme of things really don't mean a whole heck of a lot.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say, though, is that this is kind of one of the downsides of the move to 6 classifications, because when we only had 4, a lot of these teams had played head to head in conferences or in the same classification for years and years and years, dating back to the 70s and 80s. So some of it is that because we have more stratification now between classifications, like Mount Lebanon and Upper St. Clair are a 6A and a 5A school respectively, because they got split apart when they were both quad A schools for a number of years. So, that's just kind of one of those things that's happened in the new world we live in with 6 classes.
Now, one of the things that I do give the WPIAL credit for is because these games don't matter in the scheme of things, you get a lot of these matchups that they want to play in between classifications and what have you, where and I can tell you in District 3, 12, and 1, there's a lot of teams that just can't make a schedule because nobody will play them because of the ramifications of them playing a team that's a classification below them. I mean, they just want nothing to do with the fact that they would play an opponent and possibly lose to a team. It's almost suicidal for some teams to schedule like that. So it actually is easier for them to make the schedule, but still,
Yeah, and that was something that happened a while back. I'd say around the early 2000s, maybe. It used to be that the conference games kind of happened, weeks 3 through 9, and your first couple games, schools could go out and schedule on their own, but sometimes schools were having trouble finding opponents. So the WPIAL basically took control of the schedule and said, look, for weeks 1 through 9, we're going to schedule opponents for everybody, and we're going to have full control of the schedule. And that over time got them some criticism, from me included, because they were matching up teams that just outside of conference play, they were matching up teams that should never have been matched head to head against each other.
It's very intriguing.
And now with this past cycle, they actually went and really tried to fix it. I feel like they've done a good job. This 2020-2021 cycle, the schedule was much better than it had been in prior years. So I will give them credit for that.
It's unfathomable to me to even imagine some of these districts having the control over team schedules as much as the WPIAL. I mean, like I said, I couldn't even imagine that. In fact, a lot of the other districts want nothing to do with anything before, who's picked to make the playoffs. So Hey, look, that's that. I think that is like so classic that Pennsylvania has such differing hierarchical ways of dealing with football playoffs, and it all equals out to the same thing. I think it's cool, and I'll be honest with you. I would venture to guess that the vast majority of people in the state of Pennsylvania don't know exactly how WPIAL works in relationship to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people kind of know what their local district does, because I know
Yeah.
even people here kind of get surprised when they're like, "Oh, what do you mean people like are in a conference with teams from different classifications?" Because the WPIAL just has so. I mean, there's 119 teams, so when you have that many teams,
and they group them, and they group them, and they set the schedules. And it's like, man, that just doesn't happen anywhere else. It just doesn't. But that's what's cool about it. That's why I connected with you and wanted to start this show, because I really wanted, to find out, what was on the other, what was on the other side of the earth, which is the WPIAL.
A lot of good
All right,
stuff
here we
happens
go.
over here. All right, so now our WPIAL Blitz Show Player of the Week, presented by Brood Athletic, is Devin Whitlock from Bell Vernon. Over 250 total yards of offense, 6 carries for 4 touchdowns, 1 passing touchdown. And I will flip over here because I have a couple highlights that we can
nice.
show. Yes, this is off of his huddle page.
Mr. Multimedia here.
Yes. So Devin Whitlock playing quarterback, right up the gut. Chartiers Valley can't touch him. And they did this to Chartiers Valley in the playoffs when they played him last year. And they did it to him again this year, that they just could not stop Bell Vernon's running game. And I think I've said it in the past on this show, Devin Whitlock is just one of the most exciting players in the entire WPIAL with the ball in his hands. And you just, it's just, he's worth the price of admission because of the things he can do that teams just can't stop.
And like I said, on those type of highlights too, I mean, he's just bursting right past the defense. I mean, says a lot about obviously his speed and what have you.
Yes.
And the fact that he's just blowing right by those guys like they're not even there.
Yeah, and he's a really good basketball player too. So multi-sport athlete that he is. Nice. Excellent. So congratulations to Devin Whitlock out of Bell Vernon.
Yeah, we're gonna have to get a picture of the shirt that these guys are gonna get for like next week's show. We'll have to get on James over there at Brute to that way you can kind of put that up on the thing there too, what they're gonna get. So
continually evolving. That's what we do here on
That's
the
show.
Right. So some of our other top performers from this week, Cade Giacomelli from Penn Trafford had 4 touchdowns in total, 135 yards on the ground. I think he only had like 5 or 6 carries too. So 135 yards on 5 or 6 carries is definitely noteworthy. Landon Alexander from Central Valley, 408 all-purpose yards, 4 total touchdowns. That kid's just something special. That Central Valley, he's the reason they're, I mean, him and a number of other players. I mean, Matt Merritt, linebacker, quarterback, Brett Fitzsimmons, their defensive lineman, they're just loaded once again. Alex Texta from Mount Lebanon, 216 yards and 3 touchdowns. He ran for an 80-yard touchdown, and I was at the game, so I can talk about this one too. He another one where he took a handoff, went right up the middle, looked like he had 3 guys around him and made 2 quick cuts, and all of a sudden he had a lane down the sideline and just outran everybody to the end zone. So it was great player, exciting play, and really looking forward to see what Mount Lebanon can do the rest of the season, because they've got a couple other good players as well. And then shout out to Braden Woods from Waynesburg for 275 yards, 4 touchdowns. Waynesburg snapped a 15-game losing streak, which, as we move on to our streak watch, Waynesburg had the 3rd longest losing streak in the WPIAL at 15 games. So they got that big 64-20 win over Bentworth. And this is another thing, we talked about the scheduling, right? The WPIAL was like, okay, Waynesburg's lost a bunch of games. They're a 3A school, but we're going to schedule them against some geographically close teams that are like kind of middle of the road 1A schools to try and give them some competition, maybe at their level, to get them off the schneid so they can win a couple games, or at least give them some teams they can be more competitive with, rather than just making them play a bunch of other 3A schools that they're totally outclassed by. So sometimes that works. Sometimes, in a case like Brownsville, which is also a 3A school, they get shelled by the 2A school that they play in McGuffey. Or
Yeah.
Elwood City, another 3A school, playing Union, who's a 1A school, and kind of got killed. So
Well,
it's one of those things where I feel like the WPIAL at least tried this time around to be like, okay, this team has not been very successful lately. Let's try and match them up against some lower competition and give them a chance. Or by lower, I mean lower classification. Or this team has been really successful, like a Thomas Jefferson. Let's match them up against some competition from a higher classification like Gateway and see what they can do, and you get a great game like TJ Gateway. So I felt like they really tried this year with some of these early weeks in the season to give us some of those matchups. On the winning streaks, not much of note other than everyone's winning streak continued. Pine Richland's 9-game winning streak against WPIAL opponents came to an end. And on the losing side, Uniontown, which is technically a WPIAL school in everything but football, where they're playing as an independent, continued their longest losing streak in the state with a 35-0 loss to Perry, which is a Pittsburgh City League school. So Uniontown is, I'll say, more or less playing a City League schedule this year. So they went independent from the WPIAL, and they didn't join the City League, but because the Pittsburgh City League only has 5 schools, like one of them has a week off each week. So they kind of matched up against Uniontown.
Yeah,
so
kind of worked out.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. And now, we're a couple games into the season here. So looking at some teams that have had success or not success. So the left-hand column here is offense. The right-hand column is defense. So at the top, we have we'll call it the 100 club. The teams that have broken 100 points already in the season through 2 games, led by Central Valley, Leechburg, North Catholic, Mount Pleasant, Washington, and Stowe Rocks, all have totaled more than 100 points through their 2 games. Bishop Canevin, Keystone Oaks, and North Catholic have pitched shutouts in both of their games so far. Beaver and Burgettstown have only played 1 game, but did pitch a shutout in it. On the flip side, you've got Jeanette, Fraser, and York, who have not scored yet through 2 games. Brownsville, Elwood City, Hopewell, South Park have also not scored, but they only played 1 game. So, hopefully those teams are able to get off the schneid and get on the board here soon. On the flip side,
129 points allowed in 2 games. Ouch.
Yeah. Well, I think 60 some of that was to Leechburg the first week. So, there's some parallel here that Leechburg pounded Jefferson Morgan. Stowe Rocks beat Jeanette 82-0 this past week. So there's some parallels here between the high scoring teams and the teams that have given up a lot just because of where we are in the season. Mount Pleasant beat Derry by a lot this week. I think that was like 63-20 or something like that. So yeah, a lot of parallels between these two. And let's talk about this Stowe Rocks game for a minute. Because anytime anybody scores 82 points, I think it's noteworthy.
I was going to ask you, how do there was a game out here that was 77-0. I mean, Steel High won their first game, like 77-0. How do you score that many points? I get that you want to get exposure to your players and everything like that, and they want to win and everything else, but holy cow. I mean, 82 points in a 48-minute game.
Yeah. Well, with a running clock in the second half too. So,
right.
But here's what I'll say, that looking at the box score from the game, I mean, it was 62-0 at halftime. And some of that was that Stowe Rocks had 3 punt return touchdowns in the first half.
Okay, I get
they
that.
Had a fumble return for a touchdown in the second half.
Sometimes you can't help that.
In the first half. I'm sorry, in the first half. So fumble return touchdown in the first half and 3 punt return touchdowns in the first half. So that's 28 points in the first half that came not from their offense. So it wasn't like they were out there throwing the ball, and then in the second half, their 2 touchdowns were rushing touchdowns, and then they had a fumble return touchdown.
So you think you would kick it away after like some?
Well, I mean, and here's what I'll say too. Stowe Rocks, they're a 2A school, but they just moved up to 2A from 1A. So they're a relatively small rostered team. And when these small rostered teams
Yeah, right.
blow somebody out, they don't have a bunch of substitutes.
Right. It's not like they have two complete,
Right.
they probably have the same guys still playing the whole game.
Or at least,
Most
same
of them.
handful of guys. Yeah, it's not like you have, you can bring in your entire, freshman team to play or something like that. And this was a road game for them too, so they probably didn't even bring the freshman team with them. If it had been a home game, maybe the freshman team was there. But nevertheless, I don't hold it against Stowe Rocks because, it's it's one thing if you're out there throwing bombs and throwing it down the field and trying to run up the score. It's another thing if you're just running the ball and, you can't, and you can't take a knee on a punt return. Like if you have space, you're going to try and return.
You can call a fair catch,
but
it was first half though, too. Just like you said,
yeah.
it wasn't like they're running it back, in the fourth quarter, like 65 yards or whatever like that. I mean,
and the fumble return in the second half was a 10-yard fumble return. So they fumbled real close to the end.
Look, guys are out there. I mean, I get that. These guys are playing instinctively. Okay. They play instinctively. Like I said, that 10 yard, the guy's going to pick it up and score. I mean, if it's there, you're going to do it.
Right. And to me, it's more insulting to your opponents if you go out there and just take knees in the second half than I'm fine with turning around, handing it off, and running the ball. That's totally fine. And if you score, you score because the other team still has to play and tackle you. And like I said, they only scored I think 20 points in the second half. There was 3 touchdowns. So
it's a difficult situation. We have it here locally with a school that had been down for a period of time, and they're just beaten unmercifully by teams, and they're not trying, I mean, to do it, but these guys are just out there playing instinctively. You play football instinctively. You read, react, you tackle, you run. I mean,
right.
I don't know what else to say.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on. So we would like to thank Get Recruited, which is one of our sponsors, Andrew Cohen. You want to say a few words about him, Bruce?
Yeah, Andrew, the one great thing about Andrew, I met him, earlier this year, and I actually reached out to Andrew to be the sponsor because I liked what I saw. And if you just follow and get involved with Get Recruited Consulting, you'll know that this is a personal approach. Okay. They're calling the coaches, they're texting the coaches, they're emailing the coaches. Okay. About individuals. And it's not anything like, hey, make me up a profile and whatever like that. This is all done personally. Okay. You can call and talk to the guy. Okay. I mean, so many of these, recruiting websites or whatever are just that. Okay. They're just databases. And that's not Get Recruited. Okay. It's very personal with Andrew. It's very personal with his camps. And that's what I like about it. And that's why I'm associated with it. And that's why I'm very happy that he's our sponsor. So if there's going to be something that somebody does, just give him a call, talk to the guy. Okay. And you'll find out, rather than, hey, all right, hey, make something and throw it in my in a profile there. Look, it is what it is. I just say, I like this personal approach. And I think every player who is interested in playing at the next level should talk to him, and there's no obligation to do that.
Yes. Thank you. All right. So now let's look forward a little bit into the schedule. So as we mentioned that at the beginning of the cycle, the WPIAL sets the schedule for the first few weeks. Week 0 is optional, which is why I think a lot of Western Pennsylvania schools like the addition of week 0, because they could then schedule their own opponents once again. But now, the first 2 weeks of the regular season are scheduled by the WPIAL. It's all non-conference play. So we have one more week of non-conference play. And then, this time next week, when we're talking about the week 3 matchups, we'll have some teams that are starting to move into conference play and some other teams that will still have a few weeks of non-conference play. So that's where we are right now. Another week of non-conference action this week. Last week's games were mostly, or I'll say a lot of them were historic rivalry games. This week, there are some more intriguing matchups. Pine Richland with their 0-2 start now against Central Catholic. Central Valley and Aliquippa. They've met a couple times for WPIAL championship games.
Oh, wait, time out. All right. Now, we can't just gloss over, the Central Catholic Pine Richland thing here, because, people started to come unglued last week, okay, that I saw. I don't know what else to say what's going to happen after this week. I don't know. I just don't know.
Yeah. And these were the two premier 6A programs for a while, after 6A started. And then Pine Richland moved down to 5A last year and won the state championship. So these teams are very familiar with each other because they played in a conference head-to-head, and not just
maybe not with an entire new coaching staff at Pine Richland.
That's true. Although, yeah, that is true. Although there's some familiarity there. I think Pine Richland's new head coach, I believe, was a former assistant at Seneca Valley, who was also, in kind of the same conference as Central Catholic, and not just, the last 5 years in the 6 classification era, but going back into when there were 4 classes. These were the northern schools. They were all in the same quad A conference together. So they all played each other for years head to head and met a couple times in WPIAL championship games. So,
and that's my point. My point.
Here.
My point is there's blood in the water, okay? That people, hey, it's payback time. And I think that's the single biggest thing that Pine Richland's got to worry about, not only this week, but in upcoming weeks, is the fact that, that the aura and the reputation has been tarnished. And now people actually feel like they've got a chance to beat these guys. And you know what? That means a lot.
Sometimes that little bit of confidence is all you need. And I agree about the payback factor, because there was a school, Imani Christian, in 1A a couple years ago, maybe four years ago, I'd say, where they had a really talented group of seniors, and in 1A, they were just smoking everybody, and they were running up the score. They were throwing deep balls on 4th and 15 in the 4th quarter with a running clock, and they were running it up. It was 2017. They made a run to the WPIAL title game that year, and they were really, really, I'll say, cocky about it. They, they had players getting into fights with other teams. They had a couple of players get suspended for a game. Like, they were really talented, but they were also, they let other teams know how talented they were and how bad they were going to beat them. And then the following year, after all those kids graduated, everybody was out for blood against that team. Even though it was different players, it's still the same logo on the side of the helmet, same school name, and the other teams that took their lumps the year before, now that, like you said, they saw there was blood in the water, they saw they were vulnerable, and they got pounded.
Look out. And it just takes on a life of its own. Look, the reason we do these shows is so that we can offer up our opinions. Okay. This is the avenue by which that we can offer up our opinions. In my opinion, that there's blood in the water, and Pine Richland better look out, because sometimes, like I said, these things take on lives of their own, and man, it can go sideways in a hurry. So I wish them all the best, but my gosh, they really have a tough task this week.
They do. And they've got a few more weeks before they start conference play to potentially turn things around and get that confidence back. But I think the biggest question for Pine Richland right now is, can they stay confident through this small blip? 2 losses to non-conference opponents in the grand scheme of things is nothing.
Means nothing.
They can bounce back and still win a WPIAL title this year.
It's only mentally, okay? Yeah. And hopefully they understand that, and you have to believe that that coaching staff is telling him exactly that. That
Yeah.
that we can right the ship and everything like that. It still doesn't. And hopefully the community and the fans and everything else will understand that too, to stay behind them, because they really need their support now. They don't need to be having this thing like torn apart at the seams just because they have a couple of losses.
Yeah. Speaking of schools that don't take losing very well, Central Valley and Aliquippa, it's become a very heated rivalry. Central Valley was formed by a merger of Center and Seneca back in 2010, and they played in AAA for a while, and really didn't play against Aliquippa, who was playing in AA until we moved to 6 classifications. And then Central Valley all of a sudden now, is playing in 3A against Aliquippa, and they're in the same conference together because they're very nearby school districts, and they generated a very fierce and intense rivalry very quickly. Even the year that Aliquippa won the state championship, they lost to Central Valley in the regular season. Central Valley's Aliquippa's head coach is a former Central Valley assistant, Mike Warfield. So there's a lot at stake with bragging rights and just community interest, I'll say, in this game between these two schools. Even though Aliquippa's up in 4A now and Central Valley's in 3A, both of them, they played in a WPIAL championship game just a couple years ago. So it's going to be a good one. Both teams are really good. This might be, as far as a head-to-head matchup goes, this might be the closest game of the week, because there's just a lot at stake, with bragging rights in these communities, and those communities know how to talk too, but they can back it up on the field. That's the thing. It's one thing to talk trash, it's another thing to be able to back it up. They talk and back it up. So it's strength on strength here, and it's going to be super fun to watch. Penn Trafford and Bell Vernon, another one I want to talk about, because we had Devin Whitlock was our player of the week this week, and Cade Yacomelli from Penn Trafford, who's a Wisconsin commit, was one of our top 5 considerations. So, two really good players in a game here. That Bell Vernon's a 4A school, Penn Trafford's a 5A school. Both of them have kind of been programs on the cusp. I'll say they've made it to a couple championship games, haven't won one. Penn Trafford's never won one. Bell Vernon won back in, I think, 1995 or something like that. So, they haven't won a championship in a long time, but they've been very good, consistent, kind of playoff semifinalists, contend for conference championships. So this will be a good matchup between two good programs. We talked about that Seneca Valley North Hills game, and South Fayette Thomas Jefferson has a little on the line too, because they met a few years ago in the WPIAL championship game back in, I think it was 2018. If I remember correctly. Yes, it was 2018 in 4A. And that's actually the only WPIAL championship game that Thomas Jefferson has not won in the last 6 years. Wow. So yeah, they've won 5 of the last 6, and the one that they lost was to South Fayette. And it was a great game. It was a back and forth game. South Fayette got the lead late. TJ drove it down to the goal line, and South Fayette got an interception on the goal line with like a minute left to end the game. So like TJ was driving for the tying score, and that was one of the best WPIAL championship games there's been in a while. But those two going back head to head. South Fayette's up in 5A now because they're just a growing community. TJ's still in 4A, but will be a good game with some memories on the line between the two coaching staffs, at least, even if the players weren't there. At least they probably would have been freshmen, but still, nevertheless. And then Union and Neshannock, good stories out of Lawrence County. 2 schools, smaller schools, but off to 2-0 starts. So, anytime you get a matchup of undefeated programs,
I guess that's
noteworthy.
I guess that's guest alert.
Yep. Yeah, potentially.
Yep.
So
anyway.
Here's a new segment, something we wanted to try out this week. So we're going to call this our WPIAL Blitz Show Confidence Meter. So we've got a couple teams that are off to 0-2 starts, a couple teams that are off to 2-0 starts, and there's plenty more we could talk about. We tried to limit ourselves a little bit. So talking about how, confident, hopeful, concerned, alarmed, or time to panic yet. So we'll get into it and see where we are here. We'll keep this meter in
I love the confidence meter, man. That's great.
All right, so we'll talk about Pine Richland first. We've already talked about them a little bit. They're 0-2. They're the defending 5A state champions. Both of their losses came against 6A schools, though. Close loss to Harrisburg and a close loss to Seneca Valley. I would say at this point, I'm not ready to panic on them yet. I'd probably say I'm a little concerned just because, both of these games kind of followed a similar script in that Pine Richland got off to a lead early and couldn't put them away and couldn't close it out. And in past years, they had that killer instinct where they could put teams away. And once you get to the mercy rule, it's pretty much over. But once you get out to that 14-0 lead, what do you do from there? Do you go into a shell? Do you start fumbling the ball away, or do you have that killer instinct to put teams away? And so far this year, they've played close, good, competitive games.
I think
so I'm not ready to panic yet,
concern is definitely the right
yeah.
the right way the arrow should be pointing.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So let's talk about Plum now. They're the defending conference champions. They brought some players back from that team. We had some high hopes for this team. Looking at their schedule, though, let's remember they're a 4A program. Both of their losses so far have come to 5A schools, but both of their losses were by fairly substantial margins too. I'd say concerned here as well. I'm not ready to panic on Plum, but I would say my concern is that last year the hallmark of their program was just a dynamite defense, and this year giving up 40+ points in back-to-back games, granted against higher classification opponents,
and a small sampling size too. I mean, 2 games. I don't know, but
yeah. I would say concerned. Just if they can turn it around defensively, I'll feel a lot better about them. Next up, we have Mars, who's also off to an 0-2 start, and they've made 16 straight playoff appearances. So this one's a bit of a surprise. Mars traditionally has had a run-heavy offense, and it's kind of been whoever the next guy up is that they're able to plug in at running back has had great success. Once again, Mars, like Plum, in the Greater Allegheny Conference in 4A. So both of their losses were to 5A schools. Not as concerned about the loss to North Hills, much more concerned with the loss to Shaler, who hadn't won a game last year. So Shaler, had been a program that kind of been, they were really down in the dumps. They had like a 30-some game losing streak, and then they came back, made the playoffs a couple seasons, and then went winless last year. Even if it was in 5A, Mars had been a good 4A team for a while, so I would have expected them to be better than Shaler. I would actually put this one at alarmed, and I'd say alarmed.
I would agree.
Because they've only scored 6 points through 2 games. And for Mars, who's been, they had the WPIAL's leading rusher last year. They have a system that works, and for them to only put 6 points on the board through 2 games is yeah.
Yep, exactly right. I don't care whether Shaler was a 5A team or not. I think that just that, what do they say? Like, fool me once and fool me twice and whatever like that. But that's a bad loss.
Yeah, that is. Next up, Beaver Falls, also off to an 0-2 start. They're the defending WPIAL 2A champions. This one I would actually put at hopeful. So the other side of the confidence meter, not at all concerned here, because Beaver Falls is a 2A school, lost to 2 4A schools, and was competitive in both games. They only lost by 11 to Blackhawk, and they only lost by 14 to Aliquippa. And Blackhawk's, like I said, a solid middle of the road 4A program. Aliquippa is, whatever you want to slice it, number 1 or number 2 in 4A. It's pretty much them and Thomas Jefferson, and maybe Bell Vernon this year too. But Aliquippa is a top 3 4A program, and maybe in the state too. Let's not forget Thomas Jefferson won the state title last year, but Aliquippa took him to overtime in the WPIAL championship game. So, Aliquippa is a really good program with a really good offensive and defensive line, and Beaver Falls was able to put up 25 on them. So I'm still hopeful on Beaver Falls. I think they'll still be very competitive in 2A this year. Not worried at all about them losing 2 games to 2 4A programs. and two very good 4A programs too.
Yeah. Okay.
And then Shenango, down in 1A, the defending Big 7 co-champions, this was a team we kind of weren't sure about coming into the season. Both of their losses were to 2A schools, so slightly bigger. Both of them Lawrence County rivals, though. So, like around Newcastle, you've got like Shenango, Neshannock, Laurel, and Union kind of circling Newcastle in the middle. So they got Neshannock and Laurel that they lost to already. They were much closer against Laurel than Neshannock. But I'd say I'd put this one at concerned. Just, I'm not worried. I'm not ready to panic yet. They're in a conference in 1A that 5 teams are going to make the playoffs out of. So they've got plenty of time to turn around and right the ship. But, we knew there was going to be some transition for them coming in with Reese Watkins, who is their star running back linebacker graduating, and they were going to kind of have to work in some new players on offense. So I'd say concerned a little bit, but not super worried about Shenango just yet.
Okay.
All right, moving over to the other side, let's talk about teams that have had success. So we mentioned Shaler. They went winless last year. They beat Newcastle and Mars so far this year. So, both of those pretty good wins. Shaler 5A program beat 2 4A schools. And then we talked about this earlier too, that, the WPIAL did some things where with the schedule where they said, okay, these 5A schools at the, kind of the bottom of the pack, let's see if we can match them up against some lower classification opponents. And we'll see where they go. Shaler's in 5A, and they're going to have a chance to maybe compete for the playoffs. I mean, that conference right now. So I know, conference games are the only ones that matter. So it doesn't really mean anything where teams are right now. But if you look at the standings in the Northeast Conference, you've got Shaler, Kiski, and North Hills are all 2-0, and you've got Pine Richland at 0-2. So I still think Pine Richland is the best team in that conference.
Up is down,
but
purple is
nevertheless,
orange.
yeah. But nevertheless, it's that confidence thing. It's if you build confidence moving forward, good things can happen for your team. And 4 of the 6 teams there are going to make the playoffs. So you never know. Shaler, if they build confidence in their kids, that'll pay off later in the season too.
Yeah.
So in 4A, we'll talk about Armstrong.
Yeah,
Armstrong, 2 very convincing wins. And they, they've made the playoffs a couple times since the merger of Katanning and Ford City, but they've got a quarterback in Caden Olson who led the WPIAL in passing last year. Really talented kid, and now they're showing it out on the field. The one thing I'll say here, I'm going to stay at hopeful with Armstrong and not go all the way to confident, because as a 4A program, they've beaten 2 3A schools. So I'd like to see them beat someone in their own classification before I'll move them up to confident. I was confident in them coming into the season. I still feel like they're a playoff team in the Greater Allegheny Conference, but if you want to talk about can they compete for a conference title, am I confident in their ability to contend for a conference title? I want to see them beat a 4A team before I bump them up that high.
Yeah.
Union, with only 1 playoff appearance in the last 5 years, off to a 2-0 start. And here's one that I do feel pretty confident in, just because Union is a 1A program, has now beaten Mohawk, who's a 2A program, and Elwood City, who's a 3A program. Even though, Elwood City's got a bit of a losing streak, Mohawk didn't win a game last year. Mohawk, yeah. So nevertheless, either way. Or actually, wait, no.
A win's a win.
Yeah, a win's a win, right? But Union's beat 2 schools that are in higher classifications than them, so I'm feeling pretty confident about them. We'll see where it carries through when they have to play the likes of Rochester, but I'm feeling good about Union so far. Great story too, because a couple years ago they were thinking about folding their team or merging with someone because they only had like 15 players out for the team. So now they're off to a 2-0 start. So congratulations to
good
the
for them.
Yep. Bishop Canavan, here's one I feel very confident in. They've got 2 shutout losses and 2 very convincing wins. The 21-0 victory over Fraser, they only played the first half in that game because there was lightning that rolled through. But the other thing in that game was Bishop Canevin had 4 touchdowns that were called back on penalties. So it
Wow.
was 21-0 at halftime, but it could have been a lot
A lot
worse.
worse. Huh?
Yeah. And when the Lightning rolled through, then they just pounded Carleton. So I'm feeling very confident in Bishop Canevin, and especially with Clareton losing this past week to Steel Valley, Bishop Canevin might be in position to contend in that conference, potentially higher than just a playoff spot, potentially contending for a conference title there. So feeling
Still
very
early
confident
yet,
in Canevin.
but
It's still early, but they've shown some really good things out there so far. And the last one, we'll talk about Mapletown. Mapletown beat Avella in week 1 and then beat Northgate last week. So last week we had Northgate's head coach on, and then they played a narrow and close game against Avella, or against Mapletown. I'm sorry. But Mapletown was just 2-5 last year. So now they've equaled that win total already through 2 weeks this season, which is, pretty impressive. And Mapletown's been a program too that's kind of been, they're in the Tri-County South. They're not really historically successful. They might make the playoffs every once in a while, but not really, any program to write home about. So good to see them get off to a good start. I will say though, they played Avella in week 0, and they're also conference opponents with Avella, but it didn't count as a conference game. This was something the two schools kind of started a few years ago because they said, hey, we have 2 of the smallest schools, smallest rosters in the WPIAL. So even though we play each other already in
it's the
conference play,
equivalent of
let's
a
play each other
scrimmage,
again.
basically.
Yeah. We'll play each other again in week 0 just to get an extra game in. So, yeah, and actually the last time Avella won more than 2 games in a season was 2016. So they not Avella. Sorry, I keep saying Avella. Mapletown. Last time Mapletown won more than 2 games in a season was 2016. So this could be if they win one more game here, and they've got another game against Avella on the schedule, plus some of the other teams in the Tri-County South. I mean, they could potentially compete for a playoff spot in a conference where 5 teams are going to make it. So I'm not saying they're not a team. They're not going to compete for a WPIAL title. They're probably not even going to compete for a conference title. But just as a good story that has a chance to make the playoffs and, win more games than they've won in any season in the past decade. Yeah, they've got a shot at that. So, that's a good story potential right there.
Okay.
So that concludes our show for this week. Hope you've all enjoyed tuning in. Check us out on Twitter at I'm WPIAL_Blitz. Bruce is at Badgley Bruce. And you can check out our articles on steelcityblitz.com. So in addition to the WPIAL Blitz show on YouTube, we have games of the week, WPIAL standings, a bunch of other content that'll happen throughout the season. So check us out.
Schedules in collaboration with
Eastern PA
Football.com. So all the schedules are out there now, so everybody can check everything out, and they're all interactive. So it's not only, you can see what's going on this week, but everything and how it relates and how the dominoes fall or everything else as schools are playing for playoff spots and putting it all together all across the state, because ultimately it all comes together. And the same thing with this show, ultimately it ends with Hershey, right?
It will. Yes,
Well,
it will.
good.
We'll take it all the way through, just like we did last year, and hopefully we get a few more WPIAL champions winning state titles again this year, like we've had in the past.
Yeah, I think I think that there's a enormous parity in most of the classifications this year, and I'm trying to see as many teams and get analysis on as many teams week by week as possible. And a lot of that is to do with the fact that ultimately this show is going to end up at Hershey. So with all of the matchups going on, with all of the classifications and all the schools, so it really helps me out a lot, as do you, Ian. It's always a pleasure to get together and have a front row seat for WPIAL Blitz show, that's for sure. And we'll be back again next week. I mean, we'll see what happens in the next week here. Who knows? But
And next week we'll be able to start talking about, teams moving into conference play, because for some teams this is their last non-conference game that they'll play, and they'll be playing conference opponents the rest of the season. So then playoff races will be heating up, and it's always surprising to me. The season kicks off, you have a couple weeks, and all of a sudden you're halfway in, and then the playoff races are here, and then you've got the playoffs. So the season goes really fast once you get into it, and it's going to be good this year. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. For my buddy Ian, I'm Bruce Badgley. Hey, listen, thanks for tuning in to the WPIAL Blitz Show, and we'll catch you on the flip side.